Transparency remains key to renewing the country's public sector. That's according to Professor Brian Levy from Johns Hopkins University in the United States. He's penned an opinion piece in the Conversation Africa website following President Cyril Ramaphosa's latest cabinet reshuffle. Now, Professor Levy joins me now from just outside Stockholm in Sweden to discuss the country's public sector challenges. Prof, thank you so much for joining us. A fascinating and insightful read is this piece in the Conversation. I do love that site because it takes very heavy academic work and makes it easier for plebs like myself to understand. So thank you so much for your time. We just heard a piece there from one of our reporters looking at the capabilities or the lack thereof of some of our members of parliament and our executive. But you opened your piece in the Conversation taking a quote from the latest speech from the president in which he says, "We are unwavering in our determination to build a capable state, one which is ably led and which effectively serves the needs of the people." Now, from what I read in your piece, you're saying that is the key, the people, that we need to start by focusing on the people and solving the problems that people have, and not so much what you call our preoccupation with plans and putting systems in place. Explain to us what you mean by this obsession that you believe we have with a top-down system to try and make our public sector work.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. So what the piece lays out is a positive vision and a trap. And as you've said, the trap is precisely this combination of a preoccupation with plans, with systems, with coordination, and with so-called best practices. Why is it a trap? It's a trap for three reasons. First, because South Africans, when they think about the public sector and they think about a capable state, generally bring a vision of a smoothly functioning machine. That's what it should be, a belief that it can become that, and that it should be made to work that way. But that vision, that belief is wrong. Why is it wrong? It's wrong because always and everywhere, context matters. Bureaucracy is embedded in politics. And, South Africa is a middle-income country. And when you compare South Africa with other middle-income countries, not some idealized version of Australia, but the real Turkeys and Thailands and Brazils and Mexicos, in fact, they are all dealing with the messiness and the complexity of how politics and bureaucracies interact, and they sort of make it work. And we can learn from that. And then third and finally, the reason that it's a trap is because it's a vision that is not realizable. What ends up happening is that there becomes this performative logic built around empty words, and people inside the bureaucracy, and from my experience, I was the academic director of the Nelson Mandela School of Public Governance at UCT for 7 years, targeting mid-career public officials. From my experience, the public officials know that these words are empty, and have been forced to repeat them and live with them, find themselves disillusioned and losing the energy and the commitment that brought them into the public sector. And so a focus on people, a focus on problems can renew that energy and that momentum.
So explain to us then, if you say we need to focus on people and we have to focus on problems, whose responsibility is it then to take those problems from the people and try to fix them, if you're saying that we shouldn't be too focused on putting a system or the like in place? What do we then do once we've identified those problems?
So what we do in the Mandela School of Public Governance, and that's very much a program that is geared for mid-career public officials across Africa, about half South African, half from elsewhere in Africa, is the point of departure is who takes the lead? Each of us takes the lead in the space in which we find ourselves. The question that we want to ask is, given the space where we find ourselves, how can we evoke agency? So whether it's the example of Sipho Maseko as the successful CEO of Telkom, or whether it's examples from three interestingly successful programs that were written up by the mid-career public officials at the Mandela School in the Eastern Cape, a program around trying to make the expanded public works program work better in some of its aspects in the Eastern Cape, a successful turnaround of a water utility that had been dysfunctional by a committed public manager in a rural district in the Eastern Cape. The example interestingly, of agricultural extension in that same rural district with a committed, motivated team working well until it was trampled upon by the politics. Or there are similar examples which we've written up from the Western Cape. An example in Dunoon of a committed team getting a day hospital running, even though it wasn't on the plan. The example of business-government alliances for skills development. Each of these are examples of committed public officials in middle to upper middle level spaces in management who, through a combination of their own commitment and skillful leadership and management of people, then in this case, by their own managers, were able to achieve the kind of achievements, to make the kind of miracles that we don't often hear about. And often, added theme I'll come back to, they do this in partnership with other civil society actors. So when we ask the question, whose responsibility is, where is it? I think the question that one can then ask is, and this is the question that we ask of the mid-career public officials at the Mandela School, given this place where you find yourself, how can you evoke agency? How can you help make something happen, notwithstanding the obstacles, rather assume that it has to sort of cascade down from the top?
You mentioned earlier, and this is my final question because we have unfortunately run out of time, the countries that South Africa really should be comparing itself. You mentioned Mexico, you mentioned Thailand. But how unique is South Africa's problems when you look at how unequal our society generally is? The most unequal society in the world, some research will tell us. When you're looking at how we can improve the public sector, but it's a public sector that needs to service both those living in upper income areas like Sandton here in Johannesburg and also those living in rural Eastern Cape. How much of a challenge then does that add to what the public sector in South Africa needs to do to try and ready the ship?
Yeah, it's massive. South Africa is, of course, massively unequal, and it urgently needs a set of policies, inclusive policies, that address that inequality. But with the policies in place, and some are there, more to come, if you ask the question, is our bureaucracy uniquely difficultly challenged to address them compared with, say, Brazil, a country of 250 million people with also different but massive inequalities? I would say that we have, and the evidence suggests actually that our capabilities to address these problems, if the energy, if the agency can be evoked, if it's understood as a shared purpose, are at least equal to the Brazils, or at least equal to the Turkeys. So yes, the inequality is a massive challenge. Yes, the policies are needed. But I think rather than being endlessly preoccupied with saying we have to fix this machine before we can address the problems, let's focus on specific problems, specific challenges, motivate and mobilize the people that are located to address them, build the alliances, and I think that when we unleash energy, remarkable things can indeed happen.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for your time and your insights. That's Professor Brian Levy. He's with Johns Hopkins University, and he joins us live there from just outside Stockholm in Sweden, and we thank him for his time this evening.